Okay, so our first speaker this morning is the wonderful Lori Halfhide. Lori was born and raised in Horton, Kansas. She graduated from Horton High School and then attended Cloud County Community College right here in Concordia, where we are today. And she now lives here in Concordia with her husband and two sons. One of them is here today with us. This is Casey. He's our cameraman for the day and tomorrow. Lori has been the head researcher for the National Orphan Train Complex since 2016. She conducts in-depth research for orphan train descendants and for our use at the museum complex. This research has resulted in so many articles on the orphan train, writers that are published in our local newspaper, the Concordia Blade Empire. So if you get that paper, you undoubtedly, hopefully, you read some of her stories. They are really, really wonderful. Lori is a life member and current president of the Cloud County Genealogical Society, and she's also a life member of the Cloud County Historical Society and has served as the vice president on their board of directors. We're lucky enough to have her at the National Orphan Train Complex. She is really just an invaluable resource to us. So I'm happy to turn the time over to Lori Halfhide.
Okay, I am a little bit out of my wheelhouse this time. Normally I am giving orphan train riders stories and talking about all of the research I've done, and I didn't have to do any of the research for this. Wanda did it all. I was around a little bit in the beginning. I was not on the original board, but came in not long after I made the trip to Springdale with the group. What a fun trip that was. And then I quit not long after I had Casey because I couldn't do a full-time job and a new baby and this. So today I'm going to tell you about the history of the National Orphan Train Complex, and I'm just going to touch a little bit on OTSA, the Orphan Train Heritage Society of America. I didn't like that. There we go. It all began in 1986 when Mary Ellen Johnson of Springdale, Arkansas, volunteered to compile a county history book. While she was working on this project, she stumbled onto the story of a group of children arriving in Springdale in May of 1912 to find new homes. And I will tell you that their agent was none other than Anna Laura Hill. She'd never heard of anything like this, and she quickly discovered that several of these children were adults still living in the area. It didn't take her long to dive into this history, and it was something that needed to be in history books, and she vowed that she would make sure it got there. The goals of the Orphan Train Heritage Society of America were to create a permanent information center, preservation of data collected about the movement, genealogical research about riders, a museum to preserve the history, and most importantly, she wanted to try and connect siblings who had been separated. She had big dreams for this organization. She called it the Orphan Train Heritage Society of America. We call it OTSA. Her board of directors, the original board of directors, was mostly all orphan train riders. The first orphan train reunion was in 1988. Riders came to Springdale from all over the United States to spend a weekend comparing stories and enjoying each other's company. It was wonderful to be with people who had shared a similar experience. By around 2001, 2002, Mary Ellen was having health issues. She was trying to care for her elderly mother, and she just couldn't dedicate enough time to the orphan trains, not enough for what she wanted. So she put the word out, and it was decided that they were going to find a new home for the archives. There were 3 towns that became finalists in the search for the new home: Clarinda, Iowa, Concordia, Kansas, and Madison, Nebraska. In March of 2003, the OTSA board voted, and it was announced that Concordia would be the recipient of the archives. There were so many things going for Concordia. It was centrally located in the U.S. It had a very active group of volunteers with community backing, and most of all, it had a Union Pacific depot that was intended to be a museum. This is just a timeline I made up of our group, our 20 years. In 2003, this was a picture. I believe that's Brent Phillips right there, loading that file cabinet into that semi in Springdale. We went in July of 2003 to pick up all of the archives. In 2007, we had our ribbon cutting at the depot and the grand opening of the National Orphan Train Complex. And these are three of our riders. That's Leela Newcomb, who was, we dedicated her plaque yesterday, and Lois Gillette, and the wonderful Ann Harrison. In 2015, the Legend train car made its last ride. It was taken from the POW camp where the restoration work had been. About a block away from the museum, they stopped, and a whole bunch of our board members and volunteers piled in and went for that last ride. And it was placed on our grounds, and the train station would be built around the train car. In 2017, we became the Orphan Train Town with the unveiling of Miriam Zeter's statue at the Broadway Plaza. And then in 2019, we had the ribbon cutting of the Jones Education Station. From here on, we're going to kind of look at pictures so we can see how we've grown. The depot in 2003, and now, this was last Sunday. I went down and tried to duplicate pictures. You can see how much it's changed since we started back then. It was built in 1917. It was donated to the Orphan Train Depot project in 2001 by Beth Carlgren Whistler. It was placed on the National Historic Register, and careful renovations were completed in 2006. The interior was lovingly restored to its 1917 grandeur. Layers of paint were removed from woodwork, and once it was completed, it was filled with treasures Mary Ellen had gathered from orphan train riders. And you can see this is what the freight room looked like when we first got it, and that was the other day. This is the ladies' waiting room, and that was the other day. And the one I think is the most striking, this is the station master's office when we first got it, and that was Sunday. The woodwork is so much prettier without that ugly gray paint on it. Bobby and Wanda Morgan. Bobby was a descendant of Clara Reed Morgan, who was an orphan train rider to Belleville. They donated money for the construction of a research center. The building was constructed west of the depot and was completed in the early fall of 2007. It has recently been renamed the Morgan Dowell Welcome Center. It houses the archives, the curator's office, a bookstore, and a theater meeting room. It is the first building visitors go to and where they watch the introductory video that answers most of their questions about orphan trains. You folks are all here for celebration. In 2003, we had our first orphan train rider reunion here in Concordia when riders were unable to travel anymore and we couldn't get any of them here. We changed the name from an orphan train rider reunion to a celebration of orphan train riders. Each year we have descendants, we have others with interests in the movement attend, and they see programs on DNA, different portions of the history, new discoveries, documentaries, and rider stories presented by the descendants. In 2005, the city of Marion was ready to burn a little narrow-gauge passenger car that had been used on the Chingawassa rail line. It was a dental clinic, and then it was a chicken coop, and that's all we knew about it. They offered to give it to us if we would come and get it. So we did. It left a trail of feathers as it made its way from Marion to Concordia. And it took many years of fundraising and hard work to be able to return the legend back to her glory days. It was completed in 2015. And since then, we have discovered that the dentist who had his office in the legend was actually a area placement agent for the Children's Aid Society. He let his daughter use that as a playhouse when he retired, and his daughter was an orphan train rider. And after she moved out on her own with her family, it was her chicken coop. So it was meant to come back to Concordia. The Jones Education Station was built around the legend. It was quite a process. Those of you who were here for all that time remember the roof on the ground, and yeah, it was a big thing. We finally opened it to the public in 2019. The archives. The archives. When they first came to Concordia, they were in boxes, in piles, in the depot. Now, we have over 8,000 rider files in these drawers. And this is our beautiful, meticulously organized archive room where the records of the American Female Guardian Society are. We have clothing items in there, video, all kinds of stuff. Bobby and Wanda Morgan purchased 7 statues at a garden store in Texas early on. These statues were children at play, and Wanda thought they'd be a beautiful addition to the National Orphan Train Complex. In 2015, Concordia was named the Orphan Train Town, and statues began springing up all over. Each statue represented an actual orphan train rider and had a plaque next to it with the rider's story and photo, and there are now 40 statues in the community. One thing about these, and what makes it so cool, so many times we have people come in and say, well, I've tried to stop and I can't get here because you're not open on Mondays. Well, now we're open 24/7 because people can ride around town. They can learn from the stories of these riders. And it's a wonderful addition to our community. Since our grand opening in 2007, we have had over 45,000 visitors from all over the United States and the rest of the world. COVID slowed us down, but it did not knock us out, and numbers are higher now than before the epidemic, and we have a lot more great things to do.
Okay, Lori, don't sit down yet. We're not done with you. So, let me grab my sheet of paper here so I get all the names right. We, first we'll let you guys ask Lori a couple questions if you have any on her presentation, and then we are going to bring a couple of the original founding members of the Orphan Train Project and people who are involved with bringing the archives here. We're going to have some of them come up and we'll have a little panel discussion. We have some questions for them, and then of course we'll allow you guys to ask any questions of them as well. So do we have any questions for Lori about the history of OSA and Notch?
Wanda?
When did you find out about the connection for the train car? Because that train car, you know, we pushed around for a while. We found storage for it, we found new homes for it until we could get the money to do it. But all we thought it was going to be was a teaching tool. Yeah. We had no clue. So how did you find that?
It was in 2016 or 17. I was just looking for information. I knew it was a Dr. Jones that had the car. I knew that much. And So I started researching Dr. Jones, and as I started researching Dr. Jones, I found him in all of these Orphan Train articles that he had been to Great Bend and helped with an Orphan Train shipment, I guess, is group of children. He set up, what he did was he set up the placements, and then the agent from New York would bring the children. And if there were problems, if a child wasn't fitting in, if they were having issues, Dr. Jones would be the one that would go get them, and he'd take them to Marion because he had been the mayor, he knew everybody. And from that point, it just all snowballed on me. I started finding out about Mabel, his adopted daughter, and it just went from there.
Did you yell?
Yes, I did. I yelled. Everybody knows when I have found something because there is a distinctive woohoo from the other room. So, yes, I did. Yeah.
Well, he sounds like an interesting person. What do you think motivated him, from what research you've done, to be so committed to this?
He and his wife didn't have any natural children.
Okay.
And I think he was drawn to the children and wanting to help them find a place.
Lori?
Yeah.
When the train car initially came to Concordia, one of its stops for the many cleanups and facials and facelifts that it had before it looks like it does today, one of those stops was at the county museum. And my dad volunteered there with my mother, and he said, I don't know what they were thinking when they and he said, every day I come home and I have dirt in my hair and feathers in my ears. And then it ended up going out to POW camp, and then, is that the correct sequence?
Yeah.
Okay, and then where did it go next? To
From the
Orphan?
POW camp, it came to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when it arrived, shingles were blowing off the top,
Mhm.
right?
Yep. He hadn't exactly finished the top. He said that he wanted to wait on the top until it was in its place, and then when it was enclosed, he would finish the top.
It doesn't look like that today, now it's
And
beautiful.
my husband was the same way. We'd drive by the complex, and when it was still just sitting in front of the complex all wrapped up, and it looked pitiful. And my husband, we'd go by, and my husband would say, what are they going to do with that? When are they just going to burn it? So,
The other part about that is, if you've seen any wooden boxcars or anything sitting in a pasture anywhere, they don't last long. Because once that wood is exposed to the weather for a couple of years, they just kind of rot and fall apart. Thank goodness Mabel had this stuff put on it. She had shingles put on it. She had roll roofing put on it. She had the windows boarded up. If she had not done that, this little car would not be in existence today. It would have rotted out in the field as well.
Well, thanks to the chickens.
Thanks to the chickens.
yeah,
I have a general research question.
okay.
Do you have any connection with any of the railroads, or any of their records? Or
We
anything like
don't.
that?
But there's a group in Montana led by a man named John Shantz, and they call themselves old men who are addicted to railroads. They have access to the historical timetables and all of that. And when we're back at the museum, we don't have a copy of that, do we?
Not here, but we have them at the museum.
We have an address for you to get a hold of them, and he will create. All you have to tell him is either the date they left New York or the date of arrival and the town they arrived in. The group that sent him, CAS, Foundling, whatever, and he will write a beautiful itinerary of their entire trip, and sometimes he even gets as detailed as having the menus.
Wow.
So yeah, we have access to it. We send everybody to him. He's great.
Awesome, good to know. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Was Concordia one of the more popular stops for where orphan train adoptions occurred? Were there
Actually-
other places in Kansas?
Actually, when we first got the museum, we didn't think there had been orphan trains to Concordia. I found in about the same time I found out the train car was orphan train related, we actually had 3 trains come here. They were in February, January, February, and April of 1885. The original placement was to be in Wayne, Kansas, which only had like 250 people, and it was brand new town. And when there were kids left over, they brought them down here. The agent who was in charge of that train did not do things the way the Children's Aid Society wanted them done, and he was fired about a year later. But he brought the remainder of the kids here, and so there were not a lot. Children's Aid Society trains there were a lot on the east side of the state, and as you went west, there were less. I have found no Children's Aid Society trains west of Mankato to Cocker City to Great Bend, along that line. However, the Foundling Home sent a whole lot of kids out to Ellis County, which was Volga German Catholics. Yeah.
Can you talk about the process that you do when someone submits a research request for a writer and just how that works?
We have them fill out as much information as they have. I have had some come in that I'm looking for John Smith, and he might have been born about 1880, and they don't remember when he died, and I have a hard time with those. So we try and get as much information as we can. I use Ancestry, I use Family Search, and I use newspapers.com religiously. Those are my big 3. Depending on the state, I use other sources. Missouri has that great death certificate database. Iowa has some great in-between censuses. So I get the request, I start, and really it's hard to describe how you search for an orphan train writer because everyone is different. I try and find their burial first and see what I can find from that, and then I work back from that. If I can't find anything on them, I try for like the foster parents. I try researching them and try and figure out possible name changes. It's just difficult. It's difficult. It's not like looking up your basic family tree information. It's totally different. But it's highly addictive, and my husband says it is, it's very addictive.
Is there therapy available for that?
No, there is not. And my husband is very, very unhappy about that.
But actually, I do have a real question. Do you ever go through church records?
Yes.
You know, a lot of small towns would have, all these records of families.
Yeah. Some of those are actually digitized, and they are on Family Search. Actually, I just found Judy's grandparents in a church record that just popped up on Ancestry this last time I looked for him. So.
Lori?
Yeah.
Can I tell the story about what you found for me?
Sure.
Do you even remember? My grandmother was married before she married my grandpa, and her first
Get on the mic.
My grandmother was married before she married my grandpa. She was married to another man, and they had 2 children. They were 18 months old and 3 weeks old when that first husband died in a tractor explosion. So before her 21st birthday, she became a widow with 2 children. And there had always been a family legend that she owned a house. And I thought, how could she have owned this house when she wasn't even 21? She didn't have any people she could have, nobody predeceased her, so she couldn't have gotten an inheritance. She wasn't 21 when she became a widow. I thought, there's no way that's a fact. And I was telling this to Lori, and she said, well, what about that first guy? Have you ever looked up him? And I said, no, because he's not my grandpa. I came from Grandma's second husband, not her first. She said, well, let's look him up. So I got his date of death. I'm thinking, why are we looking for this guy? We found 6 articles because he was killed as a result of this accident. And in one of those articles, there was an ad placed by the local banker's life agent who said he had just written a check to a woman recently widowed with 2 small children for $2,500. Her husband had paid one premium of $72 for the life insurance policy. So that's how my grandma was a rich widow before she was 21. But Lori thinks out of the box. You know, I never would have thought of looking for information on that guy, but it answered questions about my grandma. I said whoop-de-doo when she found that.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, let's have some panelists up here.
Okay, we will have Susan Sutton come on up. And do you want to, let's see if we have, do you want a chair as well? Or are you okay with standing?
Well, let's get some chairs. I don't care.
We'll get some chairs for you. Okay, Laura will grab the chairs as I call the people up. So Susan Sutton is the current National Orphan Train Complex Board President. Next, Wonda Phillips.
She went to cover the statue.
She went to cover our upcoming statue. She'll be back in a little bit. Joan Fraser is she here this morning?
No.
Oh my goodness, we're just striking out here, but that's okay. The next 3 are all here. Judy Hill is a current National Orphan Train Complex board member. Come on up, Judy. We also have Roberta Lowery, former board member. Come on up. And then Linda Hauser as well. Were you a board member as well?
No.
Okay, she was just helping out with the getting the museum here, so you can come on up too. And then Lori, of course, was also involved, so she can also answer some of these questions.
Do we have assigned seats?
Okay. Where's Judy?
What happened to Judy? She was here. I talked to
Yeah.
her. She was right back there.
Well, now isn't that convenient? Okay, well, you two. First question, how did people from Concordia hear about OSA and their desire to build a museum?
Well, it all goes back to Mary Ellen Johnson. She's the queen mother of the orphan train. And she doesn't really mind if I call her that. But we were kind of responding to this interest that was shown when we had a presenter come to the college here and talk about being, she was impersonating Anna Laura Hill. This is where we were getting educated about this ourselves. But our president of the college at the time said, let's just put out a guest book and see who signs it. Well, when it was all over with, there were names from north central Kansas, and maybe even right here in Concordia, that had a connection to orphan train riders. And this struck a chord with us because the presentation was sponsored by the humanities division of the college. And it takes humanitarians to pull off something like this. So anyway, we were talking it over later, thinking, well, do you think we could create a museum maybe here in town or in the county for orphan trains? And I mentioned this to our head of the music department here because he never had gave me any credit for having any good ideas. And I mean, this is true. And all of a sudden, I mentioned it, he said, I think that's a good idea. Wow, amazing. I mean, this was building on our history that we already had here in Concordia with the Brown Grand Theater, the POW camp, and so on. And it was born from that. And we formed a little committee to pursue this, and we wanted to zero in on our depot. Well, one of my colleagues here at the college, her family owned that depot. They were in the furniture business, and they used that depot because it was a big open structure, and they needed a place to store mattresses. So that was good because no alterations had been made to the structure, and it was just waiting for the moment to turn itself into a museum.
What was the process of convincing the community of Concordia to support this new museum project? What kind of support was given in those early years? Roberta, you want this one?
Sure.
I'll roll back the story just a little bit. Once upon a time, I was the chamber president here in Concordia, and at the end of a work day, much to my surprise, a vehicle pulls up right outside of my office, and out comes Susan Sutton, Everett Miller, and Beth Carlgren. They come into my office, and I'm thinking, wonder what's going on here. They wanted to take me on a little field trip, and we went down to see the Union Pacific Depot, and they said, we think this should be a museum. After they developed this committee, and we met religiously every Thursday at 11 here at the college under the umbrella of the college foundation, we got a lot of those notes from our meetings, especially when something was going to happen, a reception or a presentation, put into the Blade. And that is really what kicked off a lot of the interest, or so we think, you know, letting people know what's going on. And we had a lot of people express interest and want to join, and it was a mouthful. We wore these shirts down to Springdale, and they were the Orphan Train Depot Project Committee member.
Yeah, I just found mine this morning.
Yeah. Well, mine died long ago from overuse, I think. But anyway, we utilized the publicity that we could. Once Facebook hit, we were able to use social media, but initially it was the Blade and perhaps some things on the radio as well.
What was the process of convincing OTHSA that Concordia was the place for their museum? Judy, you want this one?
I attended the presentation at the college because my father-in-law was an orphan train rider, him and his brother, and I was just, this is a second husband, and I was just being introduced to it, and I still have notes on this sheet of paper that I went to it, and then I went to Salina. I was teaching school here at Concordia, and I went to Salina to a presentation by Mary Ellen Johnson. I didn't know her at that time. I just thought it'd be interesting, and I had the two boys' names written on the outside of the paper. It was just a workshop on how to do research that I went to it, and so I became interested in it just because I had never heard of it. I'm a history teacher for 30 years and hadn't heard of the orphan train movement, but I so interested in history, and so I attended that meeting and then started attending the committee meetings, and then went to this meeting with Mary Ellen and the group, and I hit it off with Mary Ellen Johnson. We almost were like twins, and Mary Ellen wrote on one of her papers, she says, we were like sisters. She could just finish any sentence we had, and I think that one of those reasons, and that she was willing to trust in us because she knew there was somebody that was interested in it. It wasn't just somebody that wanted a museum or wanted something. I think she had this feeling that we would go. And I know we attended Mary Ellen Johnson's husband's funeral. We made this mad dash when he passed away to go to it too. And so I've kept connected with Mary Ellen since then. So I think that was part of it, and I became part of the ocean. I got my shirt on. It was maroon, everything that they had with those. And Roberta became part of the national.
I was from the beginning.
Yeah. I meant.
Oh,
you were on.
OSA.
You were on
You
Ocean.
and I joined OSA at the
Yeah,
same time.
right. And so,
And Dick.
yeah, and we worked on it with them. And so I think that all that, they became confident in us that we would, I think Mary Ellen was worried that we would drop the ball, that somebody would if it didn't. And she thought we were fighting enough, there was enough of us that we could. And I would like to say that with all the curators. You know, you keep saying the next one did this and the next one did that. You know, when you start from nothing, you can't do it all. Somebody has to do a little bit, and then that next one can do a little bit more and a little bit more. And so, you know, it isn't that somebody did better than the other one. It's just when you start from nothing, you know, you had to go. And I think Mary Ellen then and the whole group was, and we've proven 20 years.
Okay, now, I know Sue went to Arkansas. Did you go on the trip to pick up the stuff? And you were there. For those that traveled to Arkansas to get the archives, what do you remember from the trip? And what did you think as you loaded the archive materials into the truck? And I just want to inject right here. My first thought was, oh my God, what have we gotten ourselves into? Boxes and boxes and boxes, and they were not organized. And Mary Ellen has this incredible memory, and everything was filed under who submitted the information. It was not filed by the Orphan Train Rider name. So if it was bad. It was bad. But we have come through.
Well, that was quite a trip down to Springdale. One of our helpers in all of this, retired state senator, Ross Doyen, and he had a friend who had a semi, and the two of them rode down, except it had to be after harvest. Nothing happens until harvest is over with. So we arrived in Springdale, and we went into this niche facility, and Mary Ellen had done some organizing, but the most important thing we heard is when she said, "Did you get the stuff from that, the shed?" Remember that? And opened the doors, and the place was crammed full of boxes, and we managed to get it all loaded up. But once we got to Concordia, we had this depot, but nothing had been done to it, and we just offloaded all this stuff into that building, where it sat around waiting for our first curator to come. She was so wonderful in being able to hide her expression of horror. But Stephanie was great, and like has already been credited her, the idea of those window shades. Because when you have a small space to display, you have to think two-dimensional. And those window coverings, they not only cut the UV rays threatening our exhibits, but also another way to display are orphan train riders. Oh, and one other thing, the big influence. Stephanie agreed to go to New York with Linda Hauser and I to go to Ellis Island, and we found a great influence in Ellis Island because they had the same problem we had, not enough display space. So, Laura, if you've been, who's been to Ellis Island? Very good, because the big black and white photos that are on the wall in Ellis Island, the main building there, that's what we mimicked.
Roberta to tell a story.
Yeah, I want to tell a story about Mary Ellen Johnson. After we were getting started, she came to spend some time to try to help us, and she couldn't get up and down the stairs, and money was a factor. And so my husband, who was the son of an orphan train rider, had passed away. Well, in fact, he passed away a week before we went down to go to the thing, and I just kind of rode along. And anyway, I said, oh, I'll move a bedroom downstairs. We had an extra room that the kids used for just stuff, and I said I'd move a bed down there and she could come stay. Well, she did, and she was here a week to 2 weeks, I can't even remember, working on and helping us get things done. And I was teaching school, and my computer was close to the door where she was, and I was doing something at school, and her car was in the driveway, and I went and I had to type a test. And so I slowly shut the door because I didn't want the light from me working on the computer right there by her door to wake her up. And I was working away, and it was after midnight, and I get a telephone call. She's in the hospital. She had fallen, and it was icy and snowy out, and the ambulance came and picked her up and took her to the hospital. When I shut that door, she wasn't even in bed. I didn't look. I just shut the door, and she was okay, but she said, when the ambulance came, people thought it was me that had fallen, and she said, I think I was mayor of the little town of Jamestown out here, and she said, I think the whole town showed up to send her off in the ambulance, but I tell that story.
Roberta, do you have memories of the trip you want to share?
I think everything's been covered. I do want to say one thing. I cannot underscore enough what Susan said. What Mary Ellen showed us, what we thought we would be bringing to Concordia, and what actually existed there to come here, that was not worlds apart. That was like a universe apart. It was, the tip of the iceberg doesn't begin to touch what we encountered. Now that's a good thing, but oh my goodness.
The long ride down there was a great thing too, because it was you and me and Brent. Was Linda in the van too? It was either Linda or Wanda.
No, I don't think.
Wanda was in the van with us, and that was where we came up with the bad case of shingles fundraiser. Okay, what is your fondest memory of the whole process? I have to say that from the trip, it was that Mexican restaurant in Tulsa.
That was a fine place to dine, right off the interstate. But finding a place to buy some beer in Springdale after the liquor stores had closed, that was a challenge, but that was Arkansas. But it was, we were too naive to be overwhelmed. That's my quote.
I think that sums it up exactly. One of my favorite memories, though, was the collaboration that we found within the community. Kathy Schweitzer was an educator of music at the middle school and the grade schools. She actually wrote lyrics and tunes about orphan train riders, taught them to the students. She convinced other teachers within the school district to present a project to the children, and they assembled storyboards, if you will, that were put on display down at the depot, and the public was invited to attend. Now bear in mind, this depot was as you saw Lori's before pictures. So there was horrible, horrible acoustics. But various members of our committee invited a little group that, if you're not from Concordia, this will mean nothing to you, but think about Barbershop Quartet. They were called Dan, Van, and the Man. And the man was Dr. Paul Nelson, our local pediatrician, a favorite in the community. And these guys would put on engineer caps, and they would sing railroad songs. And when we did this little reception down there in the freight room of the depot, Mary Ellen was conveniently driving by with her husband and her sister-in-law, and Doris and Leroy came in, and oh my goodness, they met members of the community, and they were like, you know, your Aunt Susie that knows everybody. They were friendly with everybody. They were overwhelmingly genuine. And I think everyone present appreciated how much we were getting in this Orphan Train Heritage Society of America, not just the members of the board. We came to view Mary Ellen as the face of OSA, but the reality is when we went to Springdale to solicit, I believe the board members saw in us, the original committee, that we were genuine as well, because Norma Polling told us, one of the communities, and I don't want to disparage anyone, but one of the communities assumed that this possession of archives and photographs and memorabilia would come with a financial asset benefit. And that wasn't the way it was going to be at all. And we knew that. We knew that we were going to have to put the shoulder to the grindstone and raise funds. And I think everyone was willing to do that. We have always been a hands-on board.
Judy, do you have a fond memory you want to share?
I already did with Mary.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. Is there anything you would have done differently looking back on the whole experience? Any aspect at all you would like to do differently?
Well, as far as the fundraising model, it must have been a little scary for the OSA board to hand over their precious cargo to this organization who is on faith alone. And that model of not having $1 million in the bank, endowed trust, we didn't have, but we were willing to work for it.
Pass it on to Roberta.
I think the only regret I had was an idea of mine that I tossed about and didn't pursue. And you know, when you think of something and then you don't do it, you always wonder, would that have flown? And that was, we had in the OSA board members many descendants. Many were orphan train riders, but many were descendants. And they were spread across the country. What I envisioned could have happened, and I didn't pursue it, so the blame rests with me, is asking each of them to carry stories of their writers to the local paper, which I think they did on their own, but then tag every story with. For more information about the Orphan Train Riders, you can contact the National Orphan Train Complex and give our address and our email. We weren't open to visitors when it first happened. When it all was unspilling, we would have been overwhelmed if people would have shown up and expected a tour. I know more than once I had visitors pop it. We didn't even have a tourism office in Concordia, Kansas. People would show up in my office and spend an hour with me visiting about their ancestor who'd been an orphan train rider. But I think if we could have generated more publicity, we'd be further along than we are today. Maybe that would have been a mistake, though. Who knows?
The only thing I regret is, and we're still working on it, I do think we need some kind of national recognition through Congress, but it takes somebody to be there and working on it, to do that. But I think the history is there and it needs to be preserved. And I think, if somebody would, I think it's always the squeaky wheel. And I think that's something that, if somebody has some time to work on that.
Okay. Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Have you contacted your congressperson?
Yeah, but I've had so many things in life that you have to stay at it.
I know, and with
Yeah.
COVID, everything kind of but that's the kind of thing that they do, they get passports for people and whatever, and
Yeah.
this is something, I think, if you, present it, that this is a way to, put our state out there and,
Yeah.
and they like attention, they usually like attention, so it gives them anyway, that's just a suggestion.
Yeah, I do think it needs to be worked on.
Okay, and I have one more and then we'll open it up to you all. Looking back at how far we've come in 20 years and then looking forward, what would you like to see it notch in the next 20 years?
Oh, boy. Well, just maybe a larger profile. We have done some of these things, just like the senator who arranged for a semi to go down to Springdale to collect our newly acquired treasures. But he did that. Like politicians, they have connections, and they know. We're right here in town. We have a state senator. But on the other hand, if she sees you coming, she may. They're after money. They're wanting something. But just like Rodney Dangerfield said, sometimes we don't get no respect. And more of that.
To circle back, one of the things that was done recently, not this past year, but not in the very distant past, was copies of Elke were made available through foundation grants so that every library within the region had copies of Elke for its children. And I think programs such as that, distributing the information and keep after it. You don't have to have big things all the time, but you have to keep constant, and I think that's what we're going to have to focus on.
I stepped out for a moment. Did you explain what Elke is previous?
No. Many of you may know that Norma Polling's mother was an orphan train writer, and locally we had a student of Susan Sutton's who authored a book based on the toy elephant that her mother had carried with her on the orphan train. And in the book, the toy elephant tells the story from its point of view of traveling on the train and Anna Laura Hill's role in Mabel's placement. Mabel was the writer. And so this book is probably intended, it's a storybook, it's not a chapter book. So we're probably looking at 1st through 3rd grade. I'm a little removed from that age group. My grandkids are older than that now. But Elke is that storybook that was distributed to all the schools within the region through a generous gift from the foundation. And I think if we could keep after that kind of face-forward situation, I think that would be speaking volumes for the orphan train and doing a good deed at the same time. I mean, the history is there. We don't need to hide under a bushel.
Judy?
just a little bit more on Elke. You talked about using the shades idea. I had gone to the Titanic Museum, and that's where I got the idea of a book. They have a book with the little polar bear that was left behind, or the little bear on the Titanic. So I came back with the idea, and I think Linda and I worked on the story, and then we were trying to get it illustrated, and that's when Sue's student came in. She was going to do the illustration, and then she could she used that story to do the story and come up with a book on a project that she had. So that seemed to really work out pretty good with that. And I think the more that we can do things like that in the future. But, you know, my wish is that we could hire instead of volunteers and having to beg, and have enough money to do the projects we want to do. I think if, you know, that's why I kind of would like the national recognition.
And since I missed so much of the discussion already, I won't add anything other than our next project will be this summer. We have received a $20,000 local grant through our county, which is a recipient of funding from the wind farm that is located in our county. They are exempt from county taxes, from state taxes for so many years, but they do a give back every year. And we have been very fortunate. They helped us with that paved parking lot, Muriel. They have given us a number of grants to do things. Last year, we were very fortunate that they gave us a nice grant to help pay utilities. They don't typically give for that kind of a project, but they did for us because they felt it was important for us to continue to be here, and it was very helpful. We were able to do a couple of, I say, cosmetic projects that really needed to be done. So we have a nice grant this year that will repaint that depot. The paint on the depot was put on in about 2016, 2015, so you know how paint does not hold up. So it needs painted, and if you've noticed any of the detailing, there are lots and lots of corbels on that building that will have to be painted by hand, no doubt. Some repair to the structure, but our next really big project that is getting to be serious is that brick platform. If you've been to the museum, or when you do go, you will notice the dips in it, the broken bricks. It's nearly 100 years old, the platform is. And so back then they didn't fire bricks at the same degree they do today. And so when the water sits on there and it freezes, the bricks absorb the water, freeze, and break. So once we have that done, which like I said is a huge project, we have been applying for a couple of grants and have been turned down because they want us to have a little more equity in that project. And so we continue to do a lot of fundraising, small portions, and we have some very generous people in our group who are helping us out. So that's our next big project. And as you know, Roberta and Susan and Judy, I'm sure, have pointed out, it's a little bit here and a little bit there, but it all does really add up, and it's really important. And one of the things that we did this year, some people probably don't know, we used to own the little limestone house across the street. It was gifted to us. And boy, we had big dreams. We just had all kinds of plans for that property and what we were going to do, and wasn't it cool? We decided we could not achieve those goals. None of those, not a single one. And so we let go of that property, and we are going to focus on the parts that we have that really need attention now. So that's what we're looking forward to. And it's always a challenge, but we always have a great time getting it all organized and getting it done. And just to see, I think we have 3 new people with Orphan Train Connections. This is their first visit. This is their first time here. And so we're really looking forward to visiting with them and hearing stories and learning all the stuff that we didn't know was out there probably. And we're probably due for a break, right?
My dream for 20 years in the future is that New York lightens up and lets us have all of the Children's Aid Society records and all of the New York Foundling records, and they just send them all to us. It's not much, is it?
Not too much to ask for, no.
Last night when I was looking through my stuff, I ran across the booklet that I got in Springdale in 2002. And it was this trip where we decided we were contenders. And I was just rereading the cover of the annual meeting of members. Shirley, you were there.
Right.
2002, the theme, setting a pace for the next lap of the race, making long-range plans, securing the future of OSA Incorporated. And I don't know if you had been talking about us in Concordia as potential for that next leg of the race, but we decided we were in the running.
We placed a lot of hope in you all.
Well, thank you for placing hope in us. All right, thank you guys so much for being part of our panel, and let's give a round of applause for our panelists and for Lori Halfhide.